we have just been looking at various ways of helping us to decide whether a particular text is what kind of strata it belongs to. And I basically, the number of, there were 7 particular criteria that I spoke about. And you can probably add more criteria than that. That probably is not exhaustive. And in fact, I can think of another criteria straight away, and that is like inconsistency within the sutras is another criteria which wasn't actually mentioned. And that is another one which sometimes comes up. So what I want to do now is I want to look at a particular sutta and see how these criteria actually apply to a particular sutta. And this sutta here I have chosen for precisely the reasons that Bhante Sujata was saying before, is that the more criteria you have point in the same direction, the more certain it is that that you can actually discern where the sutta belongs chronologically in relation to the other suttas. So that is the point here. So this particular sutta, there's 5 or 6 of these criteria I mentioned before are actually found in this sutta, and that's why it is so powerful and why it's so easy to see that there's something funny going on with this particular sutta. The only criteria that cannot be used for this sutta is the metrical criteria, because there's no verse in the sutta, so no metrical criteria, and also the criteria about historical data or geographical data cannot really be used, because this sutta doesn't have any historical or geographical data as such. But the rest of them are actually found here. So let us have a look at this one. Here you can see the Pali text and with the English translation just below. Okay, so let me just read out the English translation for you, and then you get some feeling for what is going on here. Here, monks, Sariputta, quite secluded from the senses, secluded from unskillful mental qualities, enters and abides in the first jhana, consisting of rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, together with application and sustaining. And the mental factors in the first jhana, the application, the sustaining, the rapture, the pleasure, and the unification of mind, the contact, feeling, perception, volition, and mind, the zeal, decision, energy, mindfulness, equanimity, and attention, these mental factors were discerned by him one by one. So this is a tiny extract of this sutta. This sutta actually goes through all the 4 jhanas. It also goes through the 4 immaterial realms afterwards, and they're all treated in a precisely parallel way to this. All the factors of those jhanas are listed in the same way. So this passage here is really sufficient for you to have some idea what is going on. But before that is the background to this sutta. Before I do that, I want to look a little bit just at the introduction to this sutta, because there is an introductory paragraph which also is quite interesting. Let's have a look at that first, just to get it in nice order here. So this is the introduction. The first 3 sentences there, they are the introduction to the sutta, and the last 2 paragraphs, they are the conclusion. So here the Buddha says, "Bhikkhus, Sariputta is wise. Sariputta has great wisdom. Sariputta has wide wisdom. Sariputta has joyous wisdom. Sariputta has quick wisdom. Sariputta has keen wisdom. Sariputta has penetrative wisdom." So that comes first. That is what starts the whole sutta off. And then at the very end, the Buddha says, "He has attained mastery and perfection in noble virtue, attained mastery and perfection in noble concentration, attained mastery and perfection in noble wisdom, and in noble deliverance. He is the son of the Blessed One, born of his breast, born of his mouth, born of the Dhamma, created by the Dhamma, an heir in the Dhamma, not an heir in material things. It is of Sariputta indeed that, rightly speaking, this should be said. Because the matchless wheel of the Dhamma, set rolling by the Tathagata, is kept rolling rightly by Sariputta." So this passage is quite unusual in the sutta. You don't find many passages like this. Here, all the good qualities of Venerable Sariputta are collected into one. There's nowhere else you find passages with so many good qualities of any individual monk that I'm aware of. I must admit, I'm saying this a little bit off the top of my head, which always is a bit dangerous. But as far as I can remember, and I know the suttas fairly well, there's nothing quite like this anywhere else. So this is the example. When I mentioned early on, one of the examples of something being late is that it is flowery, right? It's florid. There's all these adjectives being used, and they kind of build up this very strong pictures of something being very special. And when you read this, you almost get the feeling that the person who has written this is trying to prove something, right? Why use so much flowery language? Why add so many adjectives? Why praise? I mean, Sariputta is praised by the Buddha elsewhere, but here he's like praised 10 times as much as anywhere else, right? It's really kind of adding it up far more than anywhere else. So what is the reason for that? And the impression I get when I read that is that somebody is trying to prove something here. They're trying to say that this is a real sutta, and this was spoken by somebody who was very special, right? So they've added all those qualities in there. So perhaps that floweriness, perhaps, and again, it's only one criteria, that could be a sign that there's something different about this sutta than there is on the other suttas. So that is one of the criteria I was talking about, the stylistic criteria, the floweriness of the sutta. So that is just for starters. Now let us have a look at the sutta itself. When you see the sutta, the very first part there, the Buddha says, here monk Sariputta, etc., abides in the first jhana, down to together with application and sustaining. This is a translation we did in the car here, on the way here this morning, so it's a little bit, perhaps not quite as good as it could be. But anyway, that part, which is pretty much the first half of that thing there, that is the standard description of the first jhana in the suttas. This is the Pali description. And when I say standard, I mean really, really standard, right? This occurs hundreds and hundreds of times in the suttas, exactly the same formula. There is one formula in one of the Majjhima Nikaya suttas that is slightly different. Instead of having quite secluded from the senses, it has something like aloof from attachments or something like that. Vivadi, Upadi, Viveka, something like that, I think, yeah. It's one place. But apart from that, this is a standard passage, always the same wherever you go in the suttas. And not only in the Pali suttas, if you read, when I say standard, I mean really, really standard. When you go to the Chinese, for example, and you find the formulas for the jhanas again, they are almost exactly word for word the same, even in the Chinese. Is that right, Hu Tong? Can you confirm that? Yeah? Okay, so it was always good to have a Chinese reader here, very, very handy. And word for word, exactly the same. You go to the Sanskrit, and I think the Tibetan, as far as I know, is also the same. So this is Bob standard, basically. It's the same thing you find everywhere. So this is the first part here. So this first aspect here of this paragraph is basically, this is the real sutta material you find right there. Do you want to say anything about it? No? Okay, yeah. So this is very standard and very, this is the real sutta material. And then we come to the next part here. It says here the mental factors in the first jhana, the application, the sustaining, the rapture, the pleasure, and the unification of mind. So this is a listing of what is normally called the 5 jhana factors. These are the 5 kind of aspects, if you like, of the jhana. And this is what you find, particularly in later literature, when they talk about the jhanas. This is how it's often defined. And this particular phrase right here is only found in one other place in the suttas. It's in the Majjhima Nikaya as well. I think it's in the Chula Vedalla Sutta, what's it called in English again? The shorter sutta on question and answer, something like that. And it's exactly the same one. And there too, it is spoken by a disciple, just like here. Well, here it's supposed to be spoken by the Buddha, but anyway, there it is spoken by a disciple anyway. So that already, you can see there's a shift from a part of the sutta that is very standard in the suttas, and now to a phrase that is actually very rare in the suttas. So this is only found once elsewhere. And then comes the last one. And this last one here, it has this long string of mental factors: contact, feeling, perception, volition, mind, zeal, etc. Now this is not found anywhere else in the suttas. Never are the jhanas described in this way and given in this kind of detail. So straight away you wonder, where does this come from? What is this all about, right? So it's like 3 strata here of text. One which is the standard sutta material, one which is kind of borderline sutta material, and one which is not found anywhere else at all in the suttas. So already there you can start to see the stratification of what is going on there. So when we want to look at this in more detail, what are some of the things that we actually find with this particular text? So to look at this, it's actually good to have a look at the Pali itself. See if I can do this without making a mess of this. So, yeah, okay. So the first thing that you see here, this is this line here. Oops. Don't click? No? So how do you highlight it? Can't highlight it? Okay. So this line from there to there, these are the 5 jhana factors, right? And this, as I said, is kind of borderline sutta material, those aspects there. And you see there, you see that little word there, ca, right? Cha. This means and in Pali here. Now, this is a standard way of making a listing in Pali. You have these chas in between. It means and. So you have here vitakko, cha, and vichara, and piti, and sukha, and ekaggata. So this is a standard way of doing the listing in the suttas. Now, once you move across into the next one here, you see there's no chas anymore. It's just a bare listing of factors: passo, contact, feeling, perception, volition, mind, desire, decision, energy, mindfulness, equanimity, attention. See, there's a bare sequence of things, one coming after the other. Now, this is not the way things are normally done in the suttas. Where do you think you get this kind of listing? Any ideas? Okay, you don't count as well. You have to remain quiet. So this kind of listing you don't find in the sutta. This is an Abhidhamma kind of listing. This is what you find in the Abhidhamma Pitaka. You have bare listings like this, one thing after the other. So straight away when you see that, it's like there's 2 lists here. One superimposed on the other one. One has the chas and one does not. And one looks like the Abhidhamma, one looks like the suttas, right? So that is already very interesting. So it looks like you have 2 lists, one on top of the other one. Now, what is further interesting is that when you look at the same passage for the other jhanas later on, you find that some of these factors are duplicated, right? So you have, for example, in the formula from the suttas, you have a certain number of factors given, all with cha between them. And then in the formula given for the Abhidhamma, you have the same factors listed as in the first one. So you have upeka, for example, twice. You have sati occurring twice. And you have, I think that is for the 3rd jhana. And the 4th jhana, you have upeka occurring twice. So you have in the same list, you have the same word occurring twice, right? Now that is a bit strange. Why on earth should the same word occur twice? Unless it is actually 2 separate lists that have been put together, one being an Abhidhamma kind of list, the other one being a sutta kind of list, right? So this is what seems to be happening here, and that's why you have a duplication, and that's why you have a different style in these particular in the particular listing themselves. Actually, all the things I'm saying here really comes from scholars of Buddhism. These are lay professors, that sort of thing. These are not things that I figure out myself. This actually comes from these sort of things. So all of these things here are indicative that something very funny is going on here. So that is all to do with style, right? The style is different. You can see there is a stylistic change in the thing here. To be able to know that, you have to have read the suttas, and you also have to have read the Abhidhamma to be able to pick these things up. That's what I'm telling you, because probably you wouldn't know this unless somebody told you. So the style is very different. Then there is one of the other factors that I was talking about before was the linguistic factors, right? The language is changing. And one of those important linguistic factors is vocabulary, right? So to be able to ascertain whether something funny is going on here, we ask ourselves, well, what sort of vocabulary is going on here? And when you look at this vocabulary, you find, for example, you find this word anupada vavattita. Now this word is a compound of two words. One is anupada, one is vavattita. Now both of these words, neither of these words are found hardly anywhere else in the suttas except here. When I say hardly, they're found in some sometimes obscure places. Sometimes they are found like in summary verses and things like that. But essentially, you can say they're not found anywhere else in the suttas. Where are they found? The word vavattita is found in the Abhidhamma, for example. The word vavattita is found in a work called the Patisambhidamagga, which is another Abhidhamma kind of work. That is where these words are found. And anupada also is not really found in the suttas, but again, it is found in kind of Abhidhamma type of material. Adimoko is a word that is not found anywhere else in the suttas again. It is found, but it is an important word again in the Abhidhamma Pitaka. And then you have a word like chittang over here. Now, chittang usually has a very specific meaning in the suttas. It just means mind. So it doesn't really fit in this list, right? If it just means mind, all of these things here are aspects of the mind. So how come the mind is then specified separately here? And the reason is because, again, in the Abhidhamma, chittang is usually like a synonym for consciousness. So here it seems to refer to consciousness. So again, you can see here how the whole vocabulary actually is shifted away from the standard sutta vocabulary towards vocabulary that actually belongs to a much later strata of literature. It belongs to the Abhidhamma period. It's not really found anywhere else in the suttas. So this is how you start to analyze this text. So now we have had a look at the vocabulary, we've had a look at the style, and also the fluidity of this one. What else are we supposed to have a look at? Doctrinal evolution. Okay, yeah. So doctrinal evolution here is really this whole idea here. You can see it in the translation. He discerns these mental factors one by one, right? There's a whole list of mental factors, and it actually says that he discerns the mental factors one by one. So this is, again, this idea of analysis, of analyzing the mind, analyzing the body, analyzing experience. This is, again, a very Abhidhammic idea. You analyze things, you pull it apart into its constituents, in a sense. Although you could argue there isn't any constituent here. These are just kind of different ways of understanding a jhana state, right? But the Abhidhamma likes to pull it apart and look at it from different ways. So you are here discerning, you're trying to discern these factors one by one. This is what this passage basically is saying. And that actually is quite important. That actually is a very important shift to be aware of, this idea of discerning factors one by one. That is very different from the way things are taught in the suttas. In the suttas, what you're supposed to do with the jhanas, and this is found again and again, you're supposed to contemplate the jhanas in terms of the three characteristics, right? You come out of jhana and you think, oh, this is impermanent, right? And then when something is impermanent, you know you can't control it. That is when you are willing to give it up. And that's when you can get insight. Because you understand that impermanence, suffering and non-self, they always go together. Or you contemplate it in terms of something that has been produced by volition. I have made this. Anything that has been produced must come to an end, right? It has been created through certain qualities, through certain ways of doing things. That is how the jhanas are treated in the suttas, as a basis for insight. Here, it is a very different treatment. Here, it is more to do with discerning, with pulling things apart and analyzing things. Yes, here too, and we'll see that later on, it is about impermanence, but it's impermanence in a different way. It's impermanence concerned with the individual factors rather than impermanence with the state as such. So it's a different way of looking at it. Does it matter? Is this important? Actually, before I go on to whether it's important or not, let me...
Can I just add into that? I think also one important shift that we're seeing here is a shift from where the jhanas are described in the suttas. We see what's quite a pragmatic approach to describing them. It's indicating, well, there are these factors you need to develop, these factors you need to let go of, and this is how you go about developing the jhanas. Whereas here we're getting much more of the aim is theoretical completeness. We'll try to list all of the mental factors which are listed there, rather than anything which actually has any relevance for meditation practice.
Yep. Okay. And another interesting word here, which I actually should have mentioned before, which I didn't mention at all, what is this word here? Mental factors. You see this word here, mental factors. That word is actually Dhamma. Now, the word Dhamma, usually in the suttas, has a very broad range of meanings, but it hardly ever does it actually mean mental factors. It doesn't mean the kind of the constituents of a particular state, of a jhana, whatever. That's normally not what it means. But here, it has basically the meaning which it has in the Abhidhamma Pitaka. A Dhamma in the Abhidhamma Pitaka is an aspect of experience, and you have a whole bunch of Dhammas which together make up all possible experience that a person is supposed to be able to have. That is what Dhamma means in the Abhidhamma. And here you can see that meaning actually creeping into the suttas. It means a factor, a mental factor, essentially. So, does it matter? We see this change here, and it's the kind of the evidence is sort of piling up, right? There's many things: the doctrinal evolution, linguistic evolution, the floridness of the thing. Let me just have a look at these various things again. The direct textual evidence. Well, the Buddha is talking about Sariputta, so it's basically a Sariputta's experience. Okay, I forgot about comparative study. That's another one. This is actually one of the very important pieces of evidence that I haven't mentioned yet, and that is that this is one of those suttas that does not have a parallel anywhere else. So you go to the Chinese, the Tibetan, the Sanskrit, it only exists in the Pali, nowhere else. So that, of course, is very interesting. A lot of the content in the sutta exists elsewhere, but it doesn't exist with this structure, and it doesn't exist with the last part there, this kind of Abhidhamma addition at the bottom. It does not. That does not exist anywhere, as far as I'm aware, in any of the parallel traditions. So does it matter? This is the last point here, and that is. It's very difficult to say sometimes how much it matters, but the point here is that we're moving away from like the direct experience of something. We're moving away from the way the Buddha in the suttas taught towards a new way of looking at experience. So is it possible to make the same sort of breakthrough? Is it possible to do the same type of meditation using this particular technique as it is by using the method in the suttas? And the answer to that is maybe it is, maybe it isn't. You just don't know. The point is, and I think this is really the important point here, we know that this now is a departure from the way the Buddha normally taught. We know that we're moving into new territory, Abhidhammic territory, and because of that, that is really sufficient reason to be careful. It may work, it may not work, we don't really know. This is outside of the ordinary sutta territory. Often you don't actually have to decide whether something is going to work or not. You don't have to decide whether it is real Dhamma or not. All you have to decide is that it doesn't belong in the early suttas. And once you have decided that, well, why take any chances with the Dhamma? It's too precious to take any chances with something that perhaps will not work, right? So that is really what this is about.
Could I just add on that?
Please.
It's just my own personal opinion with this is that you find a lot of the time in modern meditation methods, thinking particularly the Pawok method and some of the Burmese practices, which are very heavily based on Abhidhamma ideas. In fact, they're completely derived from the Abhidhamma, and there's almost this sense. I mean, if people do those practices and they find that they're beneficial and so on, then that's terrific. I never have a problem with that. But what I do have a problem with is this idea that somehow when you're doing these practices whose purpose is to discern these long lists of dhammas and so on, as is taught here in the Anupada Sutta, that somehow this is better than doing the practices which we find taught in the early suttas. And so the practices which if we teach based on the early suttas, sometimes people think, oh, that's just too simplistic. It doesn't really go into the detail and the depth. And these Abhidhamma-based approaches, that's the real Dhamma, that's the real thing. And I can't agree with that at all. The Dhamma doesn't have to be complicated to be profound. And in fact, I think those approaches are much less profound than the approaches found in the suttas. The approaches for me found in the suttas are not so complicated, but complicated doesn't mean profound. They are profound because of their insight into how the mind works and to how we become attached to things and how we cause suffering through our attachments. And that's the profundity, and not because of the detailed breakdown of things.
Yes, we don't. Yeah.
Because it seems to suggest, and I may be wrong, that for Sariputta, the way he practiced according to these two sutras, that even during the jhana, he's able to discern all those practices. And I hear from all the acharyas and all the non-meditation masters, usually after emerging from jhana, they can analyze what's the variation. And then we can get the realization of the vision.
Yeah.
So I've always had some problem here, because I do know that there are well-practicing monks holding this idea, and I do know that other monks hold these ideas.
Yeah. That's okay, repeat the question. The question is that it looks like when you read the sutta that you are analyzing the jhanas while you're in the jhana, but that seems to go against what many well-practicing monks say about the jhanas, that you cannot actually analyze things while you're in there. Yeah. Sure. The first thing, I think the first thing to say about that is that this is a feeling you can get in many places in the suttas, that you're actually analyzing while you're in the jhana. So it's important to remember that when you read the suttas, they're often very contracted statements of what actually is going on. It's often very short and very brief, and not everything that you have to do will be in there. It's often very kind of short. So sometimes you have to look at the suttas in a very broad perspective to get sufficient information to know what's going on. So this one here, at the very last sentence there, he just says that these mental factors were discerned by him one by one. Now, of course, the translation that you find in the Majjhima Nikaya, the translation by Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, which usually are very reliable, very good, that translation has that they were discerned by him one by one as they occurred. That's what it actually says in there. Now, if you are discerned one by one as they occur, that certainly sounds like you're doing that in the jhana, right? But actually, the Pali doesn't actually say that. The Pali says anupada vavatati, which is right there. Anupada just means one by one, and vavatati means to discern. There is nothing there which says as they occurred. So I don't know where that comes from. And when you take that out, and it just says they were discerned by him one by one, that could have happened after jhana, right? It could happen at any time. The text isn't specific. And this is how very often the texts work. You have to be very careful to read too much into them. When you see, for example, you go into a jhana and then it says you contemplate the jhana. It doesn't say you come out of it. It just says you do contemplation, right? But the same thing is the case when you go into second jhana. It says you go into first jhana, then you go into second jhana. It doesn't say you come out of the first jhana to go into the second one. It just says you move into the second one, then the third one, the fourth one, and all the way down. But that doesn't mean that you're within the first jhana, you then go to the second one. It means usually that you go out and then you enter the second jhana. Usually you have a determination for one particular jhana state. You don't kind of stay in one and then move on to the next one all the way down. And this is how it is explained even in the commentaries. So in all these cases, it is a case of you have to know the kind of the idiom of the suttas and to know that this is how they speak. And then over time you start to realize actually what is going on. But sometimes it is difficult. And in this case, you can see that one little thing like that, one by one as they occur, just by adding that little thing as they occurred, it actually already, that is enough to kind of, wear you off track in a sense and think something is there which actually isn't there in the first place. Yeah. So that is, important point. Yes, Eddie. Yeah.
Very interesting point. I think Brahmani Bodhisattva
Yeah.
From what I understand, from what I read,
Yeah.
from many scriptures,
Mm.
there should not be any distinction, okay? It should be a complementary, instead of each one becoming better than the other. And this is stated by many, how do I say, it comes back to comes back to the meditation methods. One is analyzing vipassana, and the other one is samatha. Okay?
Yeah.
So it should be a complement of two together. Because I can pronounce it that too. Ajahn Cha, okay?
Yeah.
Ajahn Cha gave this in me like a stick, okay? It's a stick. One end is samatha, the other end is vipassana.
Okay.
You bring up the stick, when you get two of them.
Yeah.
It's a complementary thing. But sad to say people, if you say some people say, oh, this is better than mine, okay? And coming back again to the history of Buddhism, okay? The translation is translated too. What we say is origin is translated. When the Buddha spoke, let's speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, just Eddie, a quick question, if you have a question. Otherwise, you can save it for the discussion. Thanks.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to comment on this idea that Pali is a translation. Pali, I think this is what Bhante Siddhartha was talking about this morning. Pali is not really a translation. It's only a very minor shift in language from the language that the Buddha taught. They're very, very close together here. And you can see that in India. You can see the famous Ashokan pillars, Ashokan inscriptions. The language on the Ashokan inscriptions varies according to place and place in India, but the variations are very small. And if you can read one, you can pretty much read the other one. It's just tiny, tiny differences. So that is not really a major problem. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, okay. Welcome to the club. Yeah. 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 It is, of course, it is perfectly acceptable to do that. And this is, I think, one of the important things to actually do when you read the sutras. Sometimes if you are uncertain about something, you don't have to take it on board blindly and say, I must believe this because I'm a Buddhist or whatever. It's okay to say, this is uncertain. And then you can ask somebody more knowledgeable than you are, and maybe you can get some deeper understanding of this. But the point is, I think the thing about the sutras is that there is information there on so many different levels. What I'm talking about now is this is pretty kind of refined investigation. Most people don't do this. And to be honest with you, I read this sutra many times. I didn't pick this up until I read somebody else's work, and they said, and then I thought, yeah, you're right, there's something funny going on here. And then I understood that something was going on. So sometimes you have to be like a scholar or an academic to pick these things up. As a Buddhist, you think, oh, this is, you're just reading it to be inspired, to get some feeling for what the Dhamma is about. You don't read it with that critical eye to pick these things up. And that's okay, that's fine. But then sometimes you're actually good to have the input from outsiders as well. So gradually, you move in that direction and you get a deeper understanding of these things. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah, 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 yeah. No, but yeah. Sure, you can. Yeah, that's what it really. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Nirodha. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, Venerable. Okay, so you're saying the question is there's two types of discernment. One is the discernment leading to liberation. Another one is the discernment leading to to seeing the detailed factors. Okay, first of all, we're talking about an English word here, right? Discernment. And it's always dangerous because when you use an English word, you don't really know which Pali word it refers back to. So this is just our translation today for discernment. The word used by Bhikkhu Bodhi, what was that again? Defined. He used the word defined in his translation. So it's not quite clear exactly how this should be translated into English. But basically what it means, it seems that you are aware of the different qualities of this experience, essentially. Yeah. I think this is actually the next passage. Let's have a look at the next passage, because then what you actually do with this afterwards. So once you have seen those factors, this is what happens next. So known to him, those mental factors arose. Known they were present, known they disappeared, right? He understood. So indeed, these mental factors, not having been, come into being. Having been, they vanish. Regarding those mental factors, he abided unattracted, unrepelled, independent, detached, free, disconnected, with a mind rid of barriers. He understood that there is an escape beyond, and with the cultivation of that attainment, he confirmed that there is. So this is really the insight part, right? First of all, you start off with the understanding. So the other one is just the discernment of the state itself, understanding the factors. And this here becomes the discernment, as you're talking about, which leads to liberation, right? This is about understanding impermanence, right? The factors arise, they are present, and they disappear. And that particular passage there is usually used in the suttas to talk about feelings, perception, and thoughts, vitaka, sanya, and vedana, and not usually about dhamma as here. So here it is, again, you can see a slight shift is applied in a new way to talk about individual factors rather than a state as such. So again, it's a different thing here. And then he understood, these having been, they come in, not having been, they come into being, having been, they vanish. So this is just about impermanence in the sense of cessation, the full impermanence of these factors. And then you have the idea of abiding unattached, independent, etc., which is kind of a standard way of saying that you are, you are disconnected from these things. And then he understood there is an escape beyond. So this is just understanding that there is something more beyond this. And by the cultivation of that state beyond, he confirmed that that's the second jhana, and then the third jhana, and all the way up to cessation that this sutta takes you. So this is, more the insight part. So you have some of the similar problems with this one here as well, in the fact that it talks about dhammas, mental factors, in a slightly different way from how the suttas normally talk about these things. Yes? A shopping list. Yeah. Yeah. You could be right. I think this, again, is more... this is not, not a usual way that things are presented in the suttas. This is quite different. And also you have that long string of adjectives there again, unattracted, unrepelled, independent, etc. This is another long string which normally you don't find quite in that as long as that. So again, a similar kind of situation. Yeah. So, Any more comments on the Anupada Sutta? I apologize if this all seems very technical and very dry. It probably is very dry and probably is very technical. But it's just that, to me, this is one of the few suttas where a lot of factors come together and seem very unusual in a sense. That's why, at least personally, I find it quite interesting to have a look at it. Yes, Venerable, yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yes. Okay, so, yeah. Sure, you're saying that the Buddha, the question is, you're saying that the Buddha often addresses people differently depending on who the audience is. How do we know who the audience is, and how does he address people differently, essentially, is that right? How does it play in understanding the sutta? Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah. So I think usually, one of the things about the suttas usually is quite interesting. When it is addressed to lay people, it tends to be very often quite basic teachings, actually, very often. And teachings about morality, teaching about dana. Occasionally, when there is a lay person who is very obviously doing very well in the practice, they give him more advanced teachings. And there's even a few cases where the Buddha tells one of the monks off for not giving a profound enough teaching to someone who was actually ready to hear that. But I think, generally speaking, the suttas are incredibly consistent, and it doesn't seem to matter whether you're teaching a lay person or a monastic. The teachings will be the same, and part of that, presumably, is also because the suttas have been presumably been made consistent after the fact, so to speak, so that things are very clear. It may have taken the Buddha a while, in the beginning, to find maybe the right phraseology, how to phrase things in the right way, and then after a while it became standardized. But I don't think that there is any great difference in how things were taught to the lay people or to the monastics. I think the phrasings are essentially the same, and that is why this kind of thing really stands out, because it's different. Yeah. Well, again, I don't think this actually is an important question, and this is one question I should have actually talked about. How does this come about? How does this actually happen? And I think what is happening here may have been like I was talking about before. You had a list of the jhanas. Sariputta was very famous for practicing the jhanas, also very famous for his sharp insight, as we saw before. And then there may have been a commentary who actually spoke about how his insight was very profound, how he was an expert in these things. And then that commentary material may then have been somehow added to this particular sutta in the Pali tradition, while not happening in other traditions. Because this is one of the things that the commentaries do. The commentaries, when they interpret the suttas, they very often use material from the Abhidhamma, for example, in the interpretation. So this is how that Abhidhamma material could then have been somehow, by accident, been added to the sutta. I think there's very little, I'm not sure if there is any real sign of deliberate tampering with the suttas as such. I think most of the time these are just accidents that happen over time.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. In this particular case, it seems to me more likely that this is a deliberate attempt by the redactors of the Abhidhamma to authorise the Abhidhamma method in the suttas. Yeah. People have said, you're introducing these new ideas and so on and so forth. They don't have any basis in the suttas. Oh, here's one. I mean, you can't ever prove that. That's a slightly more cynical way of looking at it. But there are similar things have happened down through the years, even quite recently. So with the change in the way the Mahasatipatthana Sutta is edited, and the Satipatthana Sutta is edited in a completely different way in the Majjhima Nikaya when it was edited by the Vipassana schools, and they edited it in a way to emphasise their own teaching. So I'm not at all convinced that in some cases we don't see sectarian meddling in certain aspects of these. But which is not to say that in other cases, of course, it's not just that more gradual evolution. Yeah.
So in that case, these redactors going, this is the way this sort of should have been. So
Right.
This sort of be like, or are they saying, no, it's just put in our interpretation.
Right. I mean, exactly. They're not saying we're going to invent a new thing that changes what the Buddha taught, right? But what they're thinking is saying, well, this is what we have. The text is passed down by the Buddha, but it's not always very clear. And these people are interpreting it that way, which is wrong. Our interpretation is right. So let's make sure that the sutta expresses itself in the way that the Buddha meant it to express itself, which of course is our way, right? So it's more that kind of process, yeah.
But I think one of the points that Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi makes in one of the suttas that was part of the reading list at this time is the distinction between a sutta that is definite, is spoken in definite language, and one that has to be interpreted. So there is a sutta which is, this is the final kind of, is expressed in its final words, another one which actually needs to be interpreted. And one of the things that happened in the history of the Pali Buddhism, or the Sri Lankan Buddhism, is that the idea of the putting everything into the ultimate language is very much part of kind of the trend, of philosophical trend. And that is what happened with the Abhidhamma. The Abhidhamma is essentially a project to try to put everything into kind of ultimate language. So you have the mind, everything is kind of divided up into its constituent aspects. Everything is divided up into, even time is divided up into kind of atomistic time, the shortest possible time sequence. And in this way, you create a system that for them is the ultimate way of talking about phenomena. And of course, if you think that you have created a system which is the ultimate and final way of talking about phenomena, then all you're doing here is that you're showing the ultimate way of looking at the jhana experience. So you're not actually adding anything to this. What you're doing is you're helping people to see this in a more kind of final and ultimate way. So this is how these things often come about, right? It may be a deliberate, could perhaps be a deliberate tampering of the text, but again, it is done with the intention to actually to show something which isn't there. I think that's often what's going on. Yeah.
We should probably move to the discussion.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so thank you very much, Venerable Brahmali, for that description of the text critical method. And I say that's extremely valuable, because this is one thing when I was starting to learn the suttas and so on, basically you had no one to explain this stuff. And even in the books that do the text critical analysis, they don't explain how to do it. So this is actually really useful to have that. Now, for the next session, we're going to do the discussion. So this will be from now, it's about 3 o'clock, and we'll go through the discussion till about 4:15. And the discussion will be on the Chunky Sutta. Is it early? Why? And can we apply any of the criteria that we have learned? Okay, so the 7 criteria we've looked at today, we're going to try to apply these in the context of the Chunky Sutta. Of course, you have all read the Chunky Sutta as part of your reading for this week, haven't you? Yes. Yes, thank you. And some of you have printed out copies of the suttas for the reading and have brought them with you. How many people have brought printouts of the copies with them? Okay, so quite a few. That's good. Now, what we want to do is we want to split up into breaks. We want to break up into groups. Split up into breaks. All right. We want to break up into groups, and we'll have a discussion. Now, each group has to have at least 1 copy of the Chunky Sutta. If we have more, that's good, but we must have at least 1 copy. We've got a few copies here. Prem has a few photocopies, and some people have brought their own copies. So we'll do that. We'll break up into groups, and we'll discuss for the next hour and a bit about the Chunky Sutta. Is it early? Why? And let's see if we can apply some of these criteria: style, language, social context, the content of it, and so on. And we'll see whether we decide this sutta is an early one, likely to be spoken by the Buddha, or is a late one, likely to have developed at a later date, or is it a mixture of both? And because this afternoon we also have the AGM for the Buddhist Society, some of you will probably want to be going to the AGM because I know how much you love AGMs. So that's at 4:30. So what we're going to do is we're going to finish a little bit early at 4:30, and so at 4:15 we'll stop the discussion. We'll have a bit of a summing up and a wrap up until 4:30, and that'll just give a chance. Anybody who wants to go to the AGM can go over. If you want to stay and have a bit more of a discussion after that, then you're most welcome. Okay, so let's split up into groups. So basically we want everybody to, don't go into a group with the person next to you or the person that you know, to go over the other side of the room and join another group with people that you don't know, okay? So 1 group here, 1 group in the back corner, 1 group in the middle there, 1 group in the middle there, 1 in that back corner there, 1 over here, and 1 at the front, okay? So go into groups. Your thing, Prem. And while you're having the group discussions, Ajahn Brahmali and myself will come round and join the groups and see how you're going. I went round and sat with many of the groups for the discussion, and generally speaking, there was very good discussion. People had obviously learnt something from today and were able to apply, reflect on the suttas. Of course, we're not expecting anybody. These skills are things to be learnt and studied and developed gradually over a long, long period. What we can do in this course is just give a very brief introduction and a suggestion of a few different ideas and tips that you might like to apply. We don't expect you to be experts in those things, but if you can learn something from it, then that can be useful. But also don't. If you find that what we've given is confusing or is too much information, then don't despair about that. That's not just over this particular workshop is the main workshop for discussing the text critical theory. Okay, that was the purpose of this workshop. For the next several workshops in the course, we're going to be looking more at practical examples of how what the early Buddhist teachings are and so on. And it's going to be focusing much more on the content of what the Buddha was teaching rather than on text critical method. Nevertheless, as we do that, we will keep referring back from time to time to the principles that we've learnt today. So you'll keep on revising those things and you'll see them being applied bit by bit in different contexts, okay? So hopefully by the end of the course, some of the ideas which seem alien and difficult and foreign right now will come to seem much more natural and comprehensible towards the end of the course. One other small detail I wanted to mention, which I'm not sure if we mentioned explicitly enough during the discussion earlier, is that of these various criteria which we discussed, there are certain of those criteria which are only specialists can do, right? For example, the metrical analysis of verses. I know very little about metrical analysis of verses. There's only a few people who can do that. Other things anybody can do, right? You can read a sutta and see if it's internally inconsistent. You can see if it's excessively florid. You can see if it's got a vast amount of repetitions. So there are some of these things we're talking about which anybody can do. Some things which you can understand through, once you've read many suttas, you'll get a feel for the idioms, you'll get a feel for the ideas that were current at the time and so on. And so you don't need to be a specialist to do this and to apply it, but remember that there are certain things which you do need specialist knowledge to apply. So we have to have a certain cautiousness that we can preserve the truth. Yeah, so we can say that according to my knowledge, or if we look at it in this way, then we can draw this conclusion and so on. But we can't dogmatically assert only this is the truth and anything else is wrong. Most people, when they were discussing the suttas, this particular sutta, I heard quite nuanced discussions. Most people seemed to feel that the earlier material, the framing narrative, seemed somewhat less plausible, and that the teaching part seemed somewhat more plausible, and various discussions around that. So these are the kinds of distinctions and ideas which, gradually that we're learning to apply through the course. So I was very happy to see that.
I'd just like to add one thing there, because actually I think that's a very important point, is how does an ordinary person apply these things? I mean, this Anupada Sutta I did today is a very technical discussion, and it's very hard for ordinary people to apply. I myself didn't pick it up. I got it from someone else, basically. And there was one very nice piece of advice that was given by the well-known German monk, Venerable Janaponika, to Ajahn Brahm, actually, when he visited Sri Lanka in 1993 or something like that. And he said that the way to read the suttas is to take most seriously those suttas that you see again and again and again in the suttas, the kind of paragraphs, the jhana formulas, the formulas on the gradual training, the formulas on the 5 indriyas, the things that you see repeated so many times. You can be very, very sure that if anything is the word of the Buddha, it will be that, because it has been preserved so well by the different reciter traditions, etc., etc., etc. But if you see an odd teaching, one that stands out, one that you cannot find anywhere else, that is where you have to be a little bit careful. Most of the time, even the odd teachings are actually perfectly fine, but occasionally they will not match with the rest of the suttas. And today, the Anupada Sutta, if we use that single criteria for the Anupada Sutta, sutta, straight away it kind of falls through because it is different from any other suttas, the way it explains the jhanas and how to analyze them and how to actually deal with that. So that is a very simple criteria, which actually is very powerful.
We'll finish up now by paying respects to the Triple Gem. Okay, very good. So just a couple of organisational details. You will find these things, courses have been recorded. They'll be uploaded on the BSWA website and they'll be available on YouTube in a few days. Also, the similar course that I gave in Sydney last week will also be uploaded to a website called dhammanet.org, or Dhammanet, not debt, anyway, Dhammanet. So if you want a slightly different take on the same thing, you'll find that there. The slideshow I'll give to the BSWA and we'll make that available on their website as well. And if any of you are not receiving the email updates, then please contact the administration here at the BSWA, Michael Dove or the people at the desk there, and they'll have your name put on the email list if you've dropped through slipped through the cracks there. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, and see you here next month.